first base again, and that there's no follow-through in implementation, no accountability. And so that it's good to see that we take a strategy in the implementation of those recommendations that you confirmed and agreed with. Secondly, I want to say, if you cannot control the sergeant level in the Portland Police Bureau, we just rest to throw our hands up and forget everything. Because those are the major supervising decision-making people. And I do agree that once they participate in the tactics and they lose all objectivity in that process, that there's no accountability, no supervision that takes place. And we've seen this over and over in many cases. But I affirm the recommendations that have come from ORR. Thank you for doing an outstanding job.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Dan?
I'm Dan Hamill, and I'm with Portland Cop Watch, and I am on the steering committee of the AMA Coalition, but my comments are coming from Portland Cop Watch. You have the written comments in front of you. I'm going to try to do this in 3 minutes. The first thing is about involving the community in these decisions. And while it is true, Mayor Wheeler, that you paid consultants to come up with these recommendations, it's very important that the community have a chance to look at the recommendations and say whether or not they fit what we would like to see happen. And by cutting us out of the conversation, both through the process of releasing the report when it's already done and having the Police Bureau already start implementing them, and by cutting us out of the conversation at council level, we don't have that community voice that's so important. So I just want to make that point really clearly. The Police Review Board recommendation, particularly that Commissioner Hardesty is talking about, talks about doing more training for the TRB members, but the Citizen Review Committee members who sit on those, they're not allowed to talk about what happens in the cases, but they say they are treated like they don't know anything because they're civilians and not officers. So that attitude adjustment isn't necessarily going to get fixed through training, so that's something where we should have more conversations about how to fix the TRB. There was a mention about the information about Quantas Hayes' unfortunate tragic death and Terrell Johnson's death. I wish that his mother had been able to come today. She spoke very well yesterday at the smaller meeting that IPR hosted. But you know, Quantas Hayes was told to crawl out on his hands and knees and to have his hands in the air, and one of the officers reported, how am I supposed to do that? That is, Quantas Hayes said that. And in my opinion, those conflicting orders is what led to his death. And then with Terrell Johnson's case, Officer Gier engaged in a foot pursuit, which hasn't come up here yet today, that is essentially against Bureau policy and failed to follow several aspects of the foot pursuit policy, which led to Terrell Johnson's death. And there was no accountability for that. There's a lot of information in the report about words. They talked about the officer has no other option and suicide by cop. We're very glad they're addressing those issues. We've also raised issues about the use of the word de-escalation in the case with Mr. Boucher. They said that he was, that an officer went to go get a less lethal weapon. They described that as de-escalation, but I would say anytime you bring a weapon on, that's not de-escalation. It could be mitigation of force from a live weapon, but it's not de-escalation. There's multiple common sense violations that happened that weren't discussed either by the Police Review Board or by commanders, and ultimately people weren't held accountable for them. As Dr. Haynes said, many of these recommendations are things the community's been saying for years. We do support just about everything that OIR recommended to you. We appreciate their bringing up the history of Portland's racism in their opening of their report this time. But we're in the context of multiple shootings of African Americans in the city since Donald Trump was elected, and we should need to be talking more about that issue as well.
Very good, thank you. Thank you for preparing written testimony as well. I appreciate that. Very good. Next up, Chief Outlaw, and I believe Captain Jeff Bell from EPD Internal Affairs. We're going to give the Portland Police Bureau response to the report. Thank you for being here. Chief, in particular, I know you are probably going on close to 24+ hours without sleep, so I particularly appreciate
it's about action plans, and it's about follow through. And I think it's very important, as was mentioned, there are some things we're just not going to be able to see. Hopefully, it shows a positive by us not seeing it through omission. But I think it's very important to have action plans, to have very clear tasks and responsibilities, to ensure that there's systems in place so we can go back and report out on these tasks very completely and thoroughly. A couple of things I want to talk about. One of the constant things that I saw when I first got here, it's been about 15 months since I've been here, and one of the constant themes in the first report that I had a chance to review from OIR and this report as well was the theme of sergeants jumping into tactical positions. And I identified very early on, along with staff, that we do ourselves a disservice, not just with training, but it's a cultural thing in how we train and mindset. And because of that, in 2019, what you're seeing upcoming in the fall with our in-service training is very specific training for our sergeants and our supervisors, so they know what's expected of them and what their roles are. And they're not only learning what's expected of them as a sergeant or a supervisor, but they're also learning what their people beneath them are learning, what their officers are. So it's far more robust types of training that we'll be receiving. Prior to me arriving, all in-service training, everyone attended together, from the chief all the way down to the line level officer. So everybody's learning the same thing at the same time. And so the difference, what I hope to see moving forward, is when we break out these trainings, when the sergeants train with each other and the lieutenants and the captains and commanders train with each other, everybody's learning their roles and what their roles and responsibilities are. So that's going to be a huge culture change, but I'm excited about it and I expect to see some change from that. Acting Commander Bell is here with me and can also answer any questions. He's been working very closely with me in communications over the years, and we're, again, appreciative for the opportunity to be able to speak before you publicly, but we'd really like to be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Commissioner Hurst.
Good afternoon, Chief and Commander Bell, or Acting Commander Bell. My question has to do with, Chief, it says that you said that we could not videotape officers, and it was a collective bargaining agreement. Why would that be a collective bargaining agreement?
It's my belief, and I'll let you chime in as well, with the advice from the city attorney's office, anything that could lead to discipline of an officer is subject to negotiation or sitting across the table from the union.
So that's just advice. That doesn't mean what they're saying makes sense or it's true. It's just their advice.
Well, I think there's nothing to stop us from doing it.
Right. That's my question.
And I obviously think that it suits us better for anything that we implement to sit down at the table with them, so no one's blindsided, so we're all on the same page and we're all invested in what we're trying to do.
I appreciate that, Chief, because I do think that we have this mindset that we can't do anything with policing unless we're talking about the bargaining agreement. And there's just so many things that are outside of the bargaining agreement that we refuse to address. And that's been a big problem over the years, so I appreciate that. Assistant Commander Bell, do you have a response to this particular question?
No, same as what the chief basically said, is that's been the advice we've been given, and like she said, it's because it's part of the discipline process, but, so that's where we're at.
I don't understand if it's discipline when you're interviewing them about an incident they've been involved in. I mean, we haven't even gotten to, well, what if they did something wrong? Because as a community, we'd never get there, right? This is like, what happened? So why do you see that as a disciplinary thing? I'm just not understanding that.
I think what we're saying, anything that can lead to discipline, but I also don't see it as a bad thing. I think we're making the assumption that the union would be against it. A lot of what we're doing is, just making sure that we're working in alignment with contemporary best practices, and I think you'd be surprised if they were here at the table, whether or not they would be, supportive of that. I don't want to speculate and speak for them.
Thank you, I appreciate that. My other question has to do with, are we still acting like we have a 48-hour rule?
So what we are doing is we are going by what the city council enacted as part of our policy, that we interview officers within 48 hours of the incident.
The OIR report appears to say that we go up to 47 hours in most cases, and then sometimes it's actually longer than 48 hours. I'm concerned because I don't think that was the intent of the city council. I think the terminology was that we would interview officers as quickly as possible after an incident happened. But I think the practice that we have found ourselves in is waiting until the 47th and a half hour before we do the interview. Is there an opportunity to change that so that we're actually interviewing as quickly as we possibly can, like we do with other witnesses to an event that would take place?
So we certainly do have the opportunity to do that. Part of the reason why we do wait is because for our investigators, it's better for them to gather information before they ask those questions, and that's why we're doing it the way we're doing it now. Typically, those interviews are coming in, I would say closer to like 36 hours after the incident, but I'm not sure, I have to look back at the list, I'm not sure that any of the incidents that they reviewed, being just 2 of the incidents they reviewed were immediately after the change in the policy.
Well, yes, they did allude to over and over again, hoping that we will get more to there as soon as possible rather than sticking to the as late as we possibly can. Thank you for that.
Could I jump in on that? Could we get some data on that? Because I'm not sure I agree that we've been in violation of the 48-hour rule. So rather than speculate, could we actually get the data back?
Yeah, that's easily possible.
Commissioner Fritz.
No, there's nothing that says we can't interview them again, right? So why
That's
would we
true.
not interview them right, the person who's most involved, interview them right away? And then after they've had that time to settle down, have you thought of anything else that you would like to tell us about what happened? Or we heard this. I mean, I would absolutely pay a boatload of money to get rid of the 48-hour rule. And I expected it to be almost immediately that you would be doing this interview, so I would really encourage you to think about it.
Commissioner David?